I still remember the exact moment when everything changed at my son's wedding. There I was, standing in my simple blue dress that I'd bought from a discount store, watching Michael marry the love of his life, Sarah. Her parents, dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent, looked at me like I was something they'd scraped off their expensive shoes. Sarah turned to them with a cruel smile and said, "This is the family embarrassment we're stuck with." They all laughed. But then her father's face went white as a sheet, and he gasped, "Aren't you that secret billionaire who bought my company?" The laughter died instantly, and I knew my carefully hidden life was about to explode into pieces. Comment below, as I'd love to hear your thought, and subscribe to the channel to help us hit that big 5,000 subscriber milestone. We're so close, and every single one counts. It's free for you, but it means everything to this channel. And hey, while you're at it, I've left a video and also a link to a playlist on the final screen that I promise will surprise you. Seriously, don't miss them. Thanks so much for watching all the way through. Now go hit that button and be part of the journey. Let me start from the beginning, because this story didn't happen overnight. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 72 years old. Most people who meet me see an ordinary grandmother who clips coupons, shops at thrift stores, and lives in a small apartment on the wrong side of town. They see someone who takes the bus everywhere and wears the same beaded dresses over and over again. What they don't see is the truth that I've been hiding for over 30 years. It all started when I was just 25 years old, fresh out of college with a business degree and a head full of dreams. Back then, I was married to Robert, Michael's father. We were young and broke, living in a tiny apartment and eating beans and rice most nights. Robert worked at a factory, and I had a job as a secretary at a small company downtown. We were happy, even though we didn't have much money. But I had this idea. It was 1978, and computers were just starting to become popular in businesses. I saw how these big clunky machines could change everything. While everyone else thought they were just expensive toys, I knew they were the future. Then I started reading every book I could find about computers and programming. I spent my lunch breaks at the library studying and learning. One night, I was sitting at our kitchen table, working on some calculations for a computer program I'd been thinking about. Robert came home from his shift, tired and covered in grease from the factory machines. "What are you doing, Ellie?" he asked, looking at my papers covered with numbers and diagrams. "I'm working on something that could help small businesses keep track of their money better," I told him. "I think I could make a computer program that would be much easier than doing everything by hand." Robert laughed, but not in a mean way. "Honey, computers are for big companies with lots of money. Nobody's going to want to buy something like that from a secretary." I didn't argue with him, but deep down, I knew he was wrong. I kept working on my idea in secret, staying up late after Robert went to bed. I used our tiny savings to buy some computer equipment, telling Robert it was for a hobby. He trusted me, so he never asked too many questions. 6 months later, I had created my first program. It was simple but powerful. It could help small business owners track their sales, expenses, and profits without needing to hire an accountant. I was so excited that I could barely sleep. The first business I showed it to was a small bakery down the street from our apartment. Mrs. Henderson, the owner, was always struggling with her paperwork. She would sit for hours with a calculator, trying to figure out if she was making money or losing it. "Mrs. Henderson," I said one afternoon, "what if I told you I had something that could do all your accounting work in just a few minutes?" She looked at me like I was crazy. "Eleanor, dear, I appreciate the thought, but I can't afford some fancy business consultant." "Just let me show you," I said. "It won't cost you anything to look." I brought my computer to her bakery the next evening after she closed. It took me 20 minutes to input all her information from the past month. Then, with just a few clicks, The program showed her exactly how much money she had made, where she was spending too much, and which products were her most profitable. Mrs. Henderson's eyes went wide. "How did you do that so fast?" "My computer program did it," I said. "And I could set it up so you could do this yourself every day in just 5 minutes." She bought my program on the spot for $300. It was the first money I'd ever made from my idea, and I felt like I was flying. Word spread quickly in our small neighborhood. The grocery store owner wanted the program. The auto repair shop asked for it. The local restaurant begged me to help them organize their finances. Within 6 months, I had sold my program to 47 small businesses in our town. But I made a decision that would change everything. I told Robert I was doing some part-time bookkeeping work for extra money. I didn't lie exactly, but I didn't tell him the whole truth either. I was scared he wouldn't understand, or worse, that he'd want to quit his job and rely on my success. I wanted to make sure this was real and lasting before I shared it with anyone. I opened a secret bank account under my maiden name, Eleanor Watson. Every dollar I made went into that account. At home, I lived exactly the same way we always had. I still clipped coupons, still bought generic groceries, still wore the same old clothes. Robert never suspected anything. As the months passed, my little software company grew bigger and bigger. I hired 3 programmers who worked from a small office I rented across town. I told Robert I was working late at my secretary job, but really I was running my own business. The guilt ate at me every single day, but I kept telling myself I would tell him soon. Then came the day that everything changed forever. Robert was driving home from the factory on a rainy Tuesday evening. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit Robert's car head-on. He died instantly. I was devastated. The love of my life was gone, and I was left alone with 3-year-old Michael. But the worst part was the guilt. Robert had died never knowing that his wife was already becoming successful. He'd died thinking we were still poor, still struggling. I could have made his life so much easier, but I'd been too scared and too proud to tell him the truth. At the funeral, I made a promise to myself. I would never let money change who I was. I would never become one of those rich people who look down on others. I would keep living simply, and I would use my wealth to help people quietly, without anyone knowing. So that's what I did. On the outside, I remained poor Eleanor, the struggling single mother who worked as a secretary and raised her son in a small apartment. But secretly, my software company was growing into something huge. We expanded to other cities, then other states. Big companies started buying our programs. I developed new software for different industries. Michael grew up thinking we were poor. I sent him to public school, bought his clothes at discount stores, and we ate simple meals at home. When he asked why we couldn't have nicer things like his friends, I told him we had to be careful with money, since his daddy died. It broke my heart to see him sometimes feel embarrassed about our old car or our small apartment, but I thought I was protecting him. Meanwhile, my company, Watson Business Solutions, was making millions of dollars every year. I had offices in 12 cities and over 200 employees. But I ran everything through lawyers and managers. Nobody knew that the poor secretary, Eleanor, was actually the owner of one of the fastest-growing software companies in America. I used my money to help people, always in secret. When our neighbor's little girl needed surgery they couldn't afford, they mysteriously received an anonymous donation to cover all the medical bills. When the local food bank was about to close, they got a huge anonymous gift that kept them running. When Michael's school needed new computers, they appeared overnight, with no explanation. Michael was a good boy, but like any teenager, he sometimes felt ashamed of our simple life. I remember one day when he was 16. He came home from school looking upset. "Mom," he said, "why can't we live in a nice house like Tommy's family? Why do we always have to worry about money?" I hugged him tight. "Michael, honey, we have something more important than money. We have each other and we have good hearts. Money doesn't make people happy." "Easy for you to say," he muttered. You don't have to wear the same 3 shirts to school every week." Those words hurt, but I knew I was doing the right thing. I was teaching him to be humble, to work hard, to appreciate what he had. At least that's what I told myself. Michael did well in school despite our circumstances. He got a scholarship to college, which made me so proud. He studied business, just like I had. During his junior year, he met Sarah at a party. She was beautiful, smart, and came from a wealthy family. Her father, Richard Davidson, owned a successful construction company. I could tell Michael was embarrassed about our family's situation when he brought Sarah home for the first time. He'd prepared her, I think, because she was polite but distant. She shook my hand with just the tips of her fingers, like she was afraid she might catch something. "It's so nice to meet you, Mrs." She paused. "Just call me Eleanor," I said warmly. "I'm so happy to finally meet the girl who's made my son so happy." Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, well, Michael has told me so much about your situation." The way she said situation made my heart sink, but I kept smiling. Michael looked uncomfortable, and I could see he was torn between his love for this girl and his embarrassment about his poor mother. Over the next 2 years, as Michael and Sarah's relationship got serious, I watched my son change. He started talking about money more, about wanting nice things, about being successful. Sarah would make little comments about our apartment, about my old clothes, about how quaint our simple dinners were. Each comment was like a tiny knife in my heart. When Michael proposed to Sarah, I was happy for him but worried too. I could see that Sarah's family looked down on us. At the engagement party, held at the Davidson family's massive house, I felt completely out of place in my department store dress while everyone else wore designer clothes. Sarah's mother, Patricia, made polite conversation with me, but I could tell she was horrified that her daughter was marrying into such a poor family. Her father, Richard, barely spoke to me at all. When he did, it was with the kind of fake kindness rich people sometimes show to those they consider beneath them. "So, Eleanor," Patricia said during the party, "Michael tells us you work as a secretary." "Yes," I replied. "I've been with the same company for many years." "How stable," she said with a tight smile. "I'm sure it's been difficult raising Michael alone on such a modest income." I wanted to tell her that I had raised a good, honest son who worked hard and had values. Instead, I just nodded and said, "We've managed just fine." But inside, I was starting to have doubts about my decision to hide my wealth. Maybe I should have told Michael the truth years ago. Maybe then he wouldn't feel so ashamed of his background. Maybe Sarah would respect our family more if she knew we weren't actually poor. Still, I held my tongue. The wedding was planned for the following summer, and I hoped that once Sarah was officially part of our family, she would come to see that money wasn't everything. I was wrong. The months leading up to the wedding were filled with awkward moments and subtle insults. Sarah would talk about the wedding plans in front of me, then catch herself and say things like, "Oh, but don't worry about contributing, Eleanor. We know you're doing the best you can." When they registered for gifts, everything was expensive, way beyond what they thought I could afford. They never asked for my opinion on anything, always making decisions without me. Michael seemed to drift further away from me with each passing week. He would visit less often, and when he did come by, he seemed embarrassed by our apartment. Once, I caught him quickly closing the curtains when Sarah pulled up outside, as if he didn't want her to see too much of where he'd grown up. The night before the wedding, I lay awake in my small bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, my only child would get married, and instead of feeling joy, I felt sad and alone. I had spent 30 years building a fortune that could have given Michael everything he ever wanted, but I'd been too proud and too scared to share it with him. I thought about Robert and wondered what he would have wanted me to do. Would he have approved of my secret life? Would he have wanted Michael to know the truth? As I finally drifted off to sleep, I made a decision. After the wedding, I would tell Michael everything. I would explain why I had kept it secret and hope that he would understand. Maybe then we could have the close relationship we used to have when he was little. But I had no idea that my secret was about to be exposed in the most shocking way possible. The wedding day dawned bright and beautiful. The ceremony was being held at an expensive country club that the Davidson family belonged to. I had bought a new dress for the occasion, still simple and inexpensive, but at least it was new. As I got ready in my small bathroom, looking at myself in the cracked mirror, I felt nervous about the day ahead. When I arrived at the country club, I felt completely out of place among all the wealthy guests. Everyone else looked like they had stepped out of a fashion magazine, while I looked like exactly what I was pretending to be. A poor single mother who had scrimped and saved to buy a decent dress for her son's wedding. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Michael looked so handsome in his tuxedo, and Sarah was stunning in her elaborate designer wedding dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. When they said their vows, I cried tears of joy and sadness. Joy because my son was happy. Sadness because I felt like I was losing him to a world that didn't want me in it. After the ceremony, we all moved to the reception area. That's when it happened. The moment that would change everything forever. I was standing by myself near the gift table, feeling lonely and out of place, when Sarah approached with her parents. She had that same fake smile she always wore around me. "Mom, Dad," she said loudly enough for other guests to hear, "I want you to meet Michael's mother again." Then she looked right at me with cold eyes and said the words that would haunt me forever. "This is the family embarrassment we're stuck with." Richard and Patricia Davidson laughed like it was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. Other guests nearby turned to look, and I felt my face burn with shame and anger. But then something incredible happened. Richard Davidson's laughter died in his throat. His face went completely white, and his eyes grew wide with shock. He stared at me like he was seeing a ghost, and then he gasped, "Aren't you that secret billionaire who bought my company?" The entire reception hall seemed to go silent. The silence that followed Richard Davidson's words felt like it lasted forever. But it was probably only a few seconds. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my response. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst right out of my chest. Sarah's cruel smile had frozen on her face, and her mother, Patricia, looked confused, like she couldn't understand what her husband had just said. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think you have me confused with someone else." But Richard wasn't fooled. He took a step closer to me, his face still pale with shock. No, I know it's you. Watson Business Solutions. You bought Davidson Construction 6 months ago through your lawyers. I've been trying to figure out who the mysterious owner was, and now I know. It's you." Michael appeared at my side, looking completely bewildered. "Mom, what's he talking about? What's Watson Business Solutions?" I looked at my son's confused face, then at Sarah, who was staring at me like I'd grown a second head, then at all the wedding guests who had stopped their conversations to listen to our drama. This wasn't how I'd planned to tell Michael the truth. Not like this, not at his wedding, not in front of people who had just finished laughing at me. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, but my voice came out shaky and uncertain. Richard pulled out his phone and started scrolling through it frantically. "I have your picture right here. My lawyers showed me the photo from when you attended the board meeting virtually. Eleanor Watson, owner and founder of Watson Business Solutions." He held up his phone, and there on the screen was a professional photo of me that I'd had taken for company documents. "It's you. It's definitely you." The crowd around us was growing larger. People were whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was happening. I could hear bits of their conversations. "Did he say billionaire?" Watson Business Solutions, isn't that the huge software company? That can't be right. Look at her dress. Sarah finally found her voice. This is ridiculous, she said with a nervous laugh. Eleanor works as a secretary. She lives in a tiny apartment. She clips coupons, for crying out loud. There's no way she could be some rich businesswoman. But Patricia Davidson was staring at me with new eyes. Richard, she said slowly, are you absolutely sure? Of course I'm sure. Richard's voice was getting louder, and more people were turning to stare. Watson Business Solutions bought my company for $47 million 6 months ago. The owner has been completely anonymous, working only through lawyers and managers. Nobody knew who was really behind the company. But I've seen this face in meetings, on video calls. It's her. Michael grabbed my arm gently. Mom, he said, and his voice sounded so young and confused. Please tell me what's going on. Is what he's saying true? I looked into my son's eyes and saw the little boy who used to climb into my lap when he was scared, who used to ask me to read him stories before bed, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the whole world. How could I explain 30 years of lies and secrets? How could I make him understand why I'd let him grow up thinking we were poor? Before I could answer, Sarah stepped between us. This is insane, she said, but there was panic in her voice now. Eleanor, tell them this is all a mistake. Tell them you're not some secret millionaire. Billionaire, Richard corrected her. Watson Business Solutions is worth over $2 billion. If she really is the owner... He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood what he meant. The woman they had just called a family embarrassment might be worth more money than all of them combined. I felt trapped, like a deer caught in headlights. Part of me wanted to deny everything, to keep pretending I was just poor Eleanor the secretary. But another part of me was tired of the lies, tired of watching my son feel ashamed of his mother, tired of being treated like I was less than human by people like the Davidsons. I need some air, I said, and I started walking toward the exit. But Michael followed me, and so did Sarah, and so did her parents. Soon there was a whole parade of people following me out of the reception hall and onto the country club's beautiful terrace. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. It would have been peaceful if not for the chaos surrounding me. Michael took my hand and looked directly into my eyes. Mom, he said softly, please, just tell me the truth. Are you really the owner of some big company? I looked at my son, my beautiful, honest son, who had never asked for anything but love and truth from his mother. I had failed him in so many ways by keeping this secret. Maybe it was time to stop failing him. Yes, I whispered, so quietly that people had to lean in to hear me. Yes, it's true. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth after so many years of hiding. Sarah made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. Patricia Davidson actually sat down hard in one of the terrace chairs, like her legs couldn't hold her up anymore. But how? Michael asked. When? Why didn't you tell me? Before I could answer, Sarah exploded. This can't be real, she shouted. You're lying. You live in that horrible little apartment. You wear clothes from thrift stores. You take the bus everywhere. Rich people don't act like that. Some do, I said quietly. Some rich people choose to live simply. Richard was still staring at his phone, scrolling through articles about Watson Business Solutions. My God, he muttered. It says here the company employs over 3,000 people. It says the owner is one of the most mysterious figures in American business. No one has ever seen her in person except through video calls. Michael sat down on the stone steps of the terrace, putting his head in his hands. I don't understand any of this, Mom. If you're really rich, why did we live the way we did? Why did you let me feel embarrassed about our life? Why did you let me get a scholarship to college when you could have just paid for it? These were the questions I had been dreading for 30 years. How do you explain to your child that you were trying to teach them values? How do you make them understand that you were scared of money changing who you were? Michael, I began, but Sarah interrupted me. Wait, just a minute, Sarah said, and her voice had turned cold and calculating. If this is all true, if you really are some secret billionaire, then why didn't you tell us before the wedding? Why did you let us think you were poor? There was something in her tone that made me uncomfortable. She wasn't asking because she was hurt or confused like Michael. She was asking like she was already figuring out how this information could benefit her. I was planning to tell Michael after the wedding, I said. I wanted to wait until after we were legally married, Sarah finished, and now her voice was getting excited. Until after I became part of your family. Until you couldn't back out of accepting me. That's not, I started, but she cut me off again. This is perfect, Sarah said, and she actually clapped her hands together like a little girl who'd just been given a present. Do you know what this means? We're rich. Michael, we're actually rich. Michael looked up at his new wife with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. It was disappointment mixed with disgust. Sarah, what are you saying? I'm saying your mother is a billionaire. Sarah laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was greedy and harsh. Do you know what we can do with that kind of money? We can buy a mansion. We can travel anywhere we want. We can have everything we've ever dreamed of. But just 10 minutes ago, you called her a family embarrassment, Michael said quietly. Sarah's face flushed red. Well, I didn't know then what I know now, did I? Patricia Davidson had recovered from her shock and was now looking at me with a completely different expression. Gone was the polite disdain she'd shown me all evening. Now she was looking at me like I was the most important person she'd ever met. Eleanor, dear, she said in a sweet voice I'd never heard her use before, I hope you'll forgive our confusion. We had no idea about your situation. Of course, we're absolutely thrilled to welcome you into our family. The change in her attitude made me feel sick to my stomach. These people hadn't cared about me as a person when they thought I was poor. Now that they knew I had money, suddenly I was worthy of their respect. I think I need to sit down, I said, and I sank into one of the terrace chairs. The weight of 30 years of secrets was crushing me, and the reactions of my new daughter-in-law and her family were breaking my heart. Michael came and knelt beside my chair. Mom, he said gently, I'm still confused about a lot of things, but I want you to know that I love you, no matter what. Rich or poor, you're still my mother. His words made me start to cry. These were the first kind words anyone had spoken to me since this whole mess started, and they came from my son, who had every right to be angry with me for lying to him his whole life. I love you too, Michael, I whispered, more than you'll ever know. Sarah was pacing back and forth on the terrace, her wedding dress swishing dramatically with each step. We need to talk about this as a family, she said. We need to figure out what this means for all of us. What this means, I said, standing up slowly, is that I owe my son an explanation, a long, honest explanation about why I kept this secret for so many years. Yes, but surely that can wait, Richard Davidson said, stepping forward with a business smile on his face. Right now, we should be celebrating. This is wonderful news. Wonderful. I looked at him with disbelief. 5 minutes ago, your daughter called me a family embarrassment, and you all laughed. Now you think it's wonderful news? Richard had the grace to look embarrassed, but only for a moment. Well, we were obviously misinformed about your circumstances. Now that we understand the real situation, I interrupted, is that I'm the exact same person I was 5 minutes ago. The only thing that's changed is your knowledge of my bank account. But surely you can understand our surprise, Patricia said, trying to smooth things over. You live so modestly. How were we supposed to know? You weren't supposed to know, I said. That was the point. I've spent 30 years living simply on purpose. I wanted to raise my son to have good values, to work hard, to not take things for granted. Sarah stopped pacing and stared at me. You mean you've been rich this whole time and you made Michael grow up thinking you were poor? That's horrible. You put him through all that embarrassment and hardship for no reason. It wasn't for no reason, I said, feeling my anger start to rise. It was to teach him that money isn't the most important thing in life. It was to make sure he would be a good person, no matter what. A good person? Sarah's voice was getting shriller. You made him feel ashamed of his background. You let him struggle through college. You let him worry about money when you had billions of dollars sitting in some bank account. I paid for his college, I said quietly. The scholarship he got was from a foundation I created. I just never told him that. Michael looked up sharply. What? The Henderson Foundation for Academic Excellence, I explained. I named it after Mrs. Henderson, the first person who bought my computer program. I've been funding scholarships for students from low-income families for over 20 years. Your scholarship came from me, Michael. I made sure you could go to college without debt, but I wanted you to think you'd earned it on your own merit. Because you had, I continued quickly. You did earn it. You had excellent grades and you wrote a beautiful essay about overcoming adversity. The scholarship was real. I just happened to be the one funding it. Michael stood up slowly, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. So let me get this straight, he said. You're telling me that not only are you secretly rich, but you've been secretly helping me my whole life while pretending we were struggling? Michael, I can explain. Explain what, Mom? Explain why you lied to me about everything? Explain why you let me feel embarrassed about our life when we didn't need to live that way? Explain why you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. His words hit me like physical blows. This was exactly what I had been afraid of for 30 years, that Michael would hate me when he learned the truth. I was trying to protect you, I said, tears streaming down my face now. I wanted you to grow up humble and kind. I wanted you to know the value of hard work. I was afraid that if you knew we were rich, you would become spoiled and entitled. Like me? Sarah asked, and there was venom in her voice. I didn't say that, I replied, but we both knew what I had been thinking. Sarah's face twisted with anger. You know what? You're right. I am spoiled and entitled. And you know what else? I liked it better when I thought you were just a poor secretary. At least then you were honest about who you were. Sarah, Michael said sharply, that's enough. No, it's not enough. Sarah turned to face him. Your mother has been lying to everyone for 30 years. She's been pretending to be something she's not. How can you trust anything she says? More wedding guests had started to wander out onto the terrace, drawn by the raised voices. I could see them whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was happening. The happiest day of my son's life was turning into a nightmare, and it was all my fault. Maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, I suggested. Oh no, Sarah said with a bitter laugh. I think everyone should know exactly what kind of person you really are. You're a fraud, Eleanor. You've been living a lie for decades. I've been living simply, I corrected her. There's a difference. You've been living a lie, she repeated. And now you think you can just reveal your big secret and everything will be fine? You think we'll all just accept you and your money and pretend like this deception never happened? I looked at my new daughter-in-law and felt my heart break a little more. This beautiful young woman, who I had hoped would become like a daughter to me, was looking at me with pure hatred in her eyes. I don't know what I expected, I admitted. I just know I couldn't keep lying anymore. Well, congratulations, Sarah said sarcastically. You've ruined my wedding with your little revelation. I hope it was worth it. That's when Michael finally exploded. Your wedding? He shouted, louder than I'd ever heard him speak before. Sarah, This is supposed to be our wedding. And you're more worried about money than you are about the fact that my mother has been carrying this burden alone for 30 years. Burden? Sarah laughed harshly. Being rich is a burden now? Lying to the people you love is a burden, Michael shot back. Being afraid to trust anyone with the truth is a burden. Don't you get it? My mom has been protecting me my whole life, even when it meant sacrificing her own happiness. I looked at my son with gratitude and love. Even in the middle of this chaos, he was trying to understand and defend me. She's been lying to you your whole life, Sarah corrected him. How is that protecting you? Because look how you're acting right now. Michael gestured at his wife with frustration. The minute you found out she had money, you completely changed how you treated her. That's exactly what she was trying to avoid. Sarah's face went red again. Of course I changed how I treat her. She's not who I thought she was. She's exactly who you thought she was, Michael said quietly. She's the same kind, humble woman who raised me to work hard and be grateful for what I have. The only thing that's different is that you now know she has money in the bank. A lot of money in the bank, Richard Davidson added unhelpfully. Dad, stay out of this, Michael snapped, but Richard wasn't done. Son, he said, trying to sound fatherly, you need to think about what this means for your future. Your mother is one of the wealthiest women in America. This changes everything. It doesn't change anything, Michael said firmly. My mom is still my mom. I don't care how much money she has. Well, I care, Sarah shouted. I care that she let me plan a modest wedding when she could have paid for something spectacular. I care that she let us register for simple gifts when she could have bought us a house. I care that she sat there and let my parents treat her like she was beneath us when she's worth more than all of us combined. So you're upset that she's humble? Michael asked. You're angry that she doesn't flaunt her wealth? I'm angry that she made fools of all of us. Sarah's voice was reaching a dangerous pitch. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? What are all our friends going to think when they find out that I called a billionaire a family embarrassment? And there it was. The truth came out. Sarah wasn't upset about the lying or the deception. She was upset because she had been caught being cruel to someone who turned out to be more powerful than her. Michael stared at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. That's what you're worried about? How this makes you look? Of course that's what I'm worried about, Sarah said. Our reputation is ruined. Everyone's going to think we're idiots. Maybe we are idiots, Michael said quietly. Maybe I'm an idiot for not seeing who you really are until right now. The terrace fell silent except for the sound of Sarah's sharp breathing and the distant noise of the reception continuing inside. The sun had set completely now, and the only light came from the elegant lamps scattered around the terrace. I watched my son and his new wife stare at each other across what seemed like an impossible gulf. In the span of 30 minutes, my secret had destroyed what should have been the happiest night of their lives. Michael, I said softly, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. He turned to look at me, and his expression softened. No, Mom. It's not your fault. You did what you thought was right. But I should have told you the truth years ago. I should have trusted you to handle it maturely. Maybe, he said. But I understand why you didn't. And honestly, seeing how everyone is reacting now, I think you were probably right to be careful. Sarah made a sound of disgust. So, now you're taking her side? I'm not taking anyone's side, Michael said tiredly. I'm just trying to figure out what's real anymore. What's real, I said, standing up slowly, is that I love you more than anything in this world. What's real is that every decision I made, right or wrong, was because I wanted you to grow up to be a good person. And what's real is that I'm proud of the man you've become regardless of what happens next. Sarah laughed bitterly. How touching. The billionaire loves her son. That makes everything okay, right? Sarah, stop, Michael warned. No, I won't stop. I want to know what happens now. Are we supposed to pretend this never happened? Are we supposed to go back in there and finish our reception like nothing changed? I don't know, Michael admitted. Well, I do, Sarah said, and her voice had turned cold and calculating again. I know exactly what's going to happen. Your mother is going to make this right. What do you mean? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. Sarah smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. I mean, you owe us. You owe us for 30 years of lies. You owe us for the embarrassment you've caused tonight. And you owe us for making us look like fools in front of everyone we know. I don't owe you anything, I said quietly. Oh, but you do, Sarah continued, her smile growing wider and more menacing. Because if you don't make this right, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. I'm going to tell everyone that you're a fraud who's been lying about who you are for decades. I'm going to make sure your precious reputation is destroyed just like you've destroyed mine. Michael stared at his wife in horror. Sarah, what are you saying? I'm saying your mother needs to pay for what she's done, Sarah said simply. Literally pay. And I know exactly how much I think her lies are worth. The threat hung in the air between us like a poisonous cloud. My new daughter-in-law was trying to blackmail me, and she was doing it on her wedding night, in front of her parents and my son. But what she didn't know was that I hadn't become a billionaire by backing down from bullies. And I certainly wasn't going to start now. I looked at Sarah's cold, calculating smile and felt something inside me shift. For 30 years, I had chosen to be humble, to be quiet, to let people underestimate me. But there comes a moment in every person's life when they have to decide whether to keep being stepped on or to stand up and show who they really are. Sarah, I said, my voice calm but firm, I think you've misunderstood something very important. Her smile faltered slightly, but she kept her chin raised defiantly. What's that? You seem to think that because I've been living simply, I'm weak. You think that because I've kept quiet about my success, I'm someone you can push around. I took a step closer to her, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw uncertainty flicker in her eyes. You're wrong. Michael was watching this exchange with growing alarm. Mom, maybe we should all just take a break and— No, Michael, I interrupted, never taking my eyes off Sarah. Your wife has something she wants to say to me, and I think we should let her say it. Go ahead, Sarah. Tell me exactly how much you think my lies are worth. Sarah glanced around nervously. More wedding guests had drifted out onto the terrace, drawn by the drama, and she was clearly uncomfortable with the audience. But her greed won out over her embarrassment. $5 million, she said, lifting her chin again. I think $5 million would be appropriate compensation for the humiliation you've put us through tonight. The number hung in the air like a slap. Patricia Davidson gasped audibly, and even Richard looked shocked by his daughter's boldness. Several wedding guests whispered to each other, unable to believe what they were hearing. Michael's face went completely white. Sarah, what is wrong with you? You can't blackmail my mother. It's not blackmail, Sarah said defensively. It's just fair compensation. She lied to us, Michael. She made us look stupid. She owes us. I laughed then, a real laugh that started deep in my belly and worked its way up. It wasn't a bitter or angry laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had finally seen clearly after years of looking through fog. $5 million, I repeated, still chuckling. Sarah, honey, do you have any idea how business works? Her confident expression started to crumble. What do you mean? I mean that in the business world, when someone tries to threaten you or extort money from you, you don't reward them. You crush them. My voice was still calm, but there was steel in it now. And I've been crushing people who tried to take advantage of me for 30 years. Richard Davidson stepped forward, trying to smooth things over. Now, Eleanor, I'm sure Sarah didn't mean. Oh, she meant every word, I said, turning my attention to him. But since we're talking about what people owe each other, Richard, let's discuss your company. His face went pale. What about my company? Davidson Construction. I bought it 6 months ago for $47 million, which was actually more than it was worth. Your business was failing, Richard. You had 3 major projects go over budget, 2 lawsuits from clients who weren't satisfied with your work, and debts that were about to sink the whole operation. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. How do you know all of this? Because I make it my business to know everything about companies before I buy them. I saved your business, Richard. I saved your employees' jobs. I saved your reputation. I paused, letting that sink in. And I can just as easily destroy it all. The terrace was completely silent now, except for the distant sound of music from the reception hall. Even Sarah seemed to realize that she had pushed the wrong person too far. Mom, Michael said quietly, what are you saying? I'm saying that your new wife has made a very serious mistake, I replied, still looking at Sarah. She thinks she can threaten me and demand money from me, but what she doesn't understand is that I didn't become successful by letting people walk all over me. Sarah's face was now completely white. I didn't mean, oh, you meant every word, I said. You saw dollar signs, and you decided to try to cash in, but let me explain something to you about how this works. I own your father's company. That means I control his income, his employees, his reputation. I could shut down Davidson Construction tomorrow with a single phone call. You wouldn't, Patricia whispered. Wouldn't I? I turned to look at her. Your daughter just tried to extort $5 million from me at her own wedding. She called me a family embarrassment and then demanded payment for her hurt feelings. Why exactly should I show mercy to your family? Michael grabbed my arm gently. Mom, please. This isn't you. This isn't who you are. I looked at my son and felt some of the anger drain out of me. He was right. This wasn't who I wanted to be. But I also couldn't let people think they could take advantage of me or my family. You're right, Michael, I said softly. This isn't who I am. But sometimes people need to understand that kindness isn't the same thing as weakness. I turned back to Sarah, who was now trembling slightly. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to me for your behavior tonight. You're going to apologize to your new husband for trying to blackmail his mother, and you're going to go back into that reception hall and pretend to be happy for the rest of your wedding night. And if I don't? Sarah asked, though her voice was barely above a whisper. If you don't, then tomorrow morning I'm going to start making some phone calls. I'm going to call the society pages of every newspaper in the city and tell them the story of how my new daughter-in-law tried to extort money from me at her wedding. I'm going to call all your friends and make sure they know exactly what kind of person you really are. Sarah's eyes filled with tears of pity, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage and humiliation. Furthermore, I continued, I'm going to liquidate Davidson Construction and sell all the assets. Your father will lose everything he's spent 20 years building. Your family's reputation in this city will be destroyed, and all because you got greedy and decided to threaten the wrong person. You can't do that, Richard said desperately. My employees, they depend on those jobs. You should have thought of that before your daughter decided to try to blackmail me, I replied. But don't worry. I'll make sure all your employees find new jobs. I have connections at dozens of construction companies. They'll be fine. It's your family that will suffer. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the wheels turning in everyone's heads as they realized that the quiet, humble woman they had been looking down on all evening, actually held all the power in this situation. Finally, Sarah spoke, and her voice was small and defeated. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to say what you should have said the moment you found out the truth," I replied. "I want a real apology. Not because you're afraid of what I might do to your family, but because you understand that what you did was wrong." Sarah looked around at all the faces watching her, her parents, her new husband, the wedding guests who had witnessed her attempted extortion. I could see her calculating whether she could somehow turn this situation to her advantage, but she was smart enough to realize that she had lost. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "For what?" Sarah's jaw clenched, but she forced the words out. "I'm sorry for calling you a family embarrassment. I'm sorry for for asking you for money. I'm sorry for how I treated you tonight." It wasn't the most heartfelt apology I'd ever received, but it was a start. I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Sarah. Now I think we should all go back inside and try to salvage what's left of your wedding reception." But Michael stepped forward, and there was something in his expression that made my heart sink. "No, Mom," he said quietly. "I don't think we can just go back inside and pretend this never happened." "Michael," I started. "I love you," he interrupted. "I love you more than anything. And I understand why you kept your secret. I even understand why you had to put Sarah in her place just now. But I can't pretend that everything is okay." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "I mean that my whole life has been built on a lie," Michael said, and his voice was full of pain. "Every conversation we've had about money, every time I felt embarrassed about our circumstances, every sacrifice I thought you were making for me, it was all fake." "It wasn't fake," I protested. "My love for you was real. My desire to teach you good values was real. The sacrifices were real too, just different than you thought." "But how can I trust anything you tell me now?" Michael asked. "How do I know what's real and what's another lie you're telling to protect me?" The question hit me like a physical blow. This was exactly what I had been afraid of for 30 years, that my son would lose faith in me when he learned the truth. "Everything I've told you about what matters in life is real," I said desperately. "Being kind, working hard, treating people with respect, that's all real. The money doesn't change any of that." "But it changes everything else," Michael said sadly. "It changes every memory I have of our life together. It changes how I see myself, how I see you, how I see my childhood." Sarah was watching this exchange with a calculating look in her eyes, and I could tell she was pleased to see Michael turning away from me. This is what she wanted, to drive a wedge between my son and me. "Michael," I said softly, "please don't let her win. Don't let Sarah's greed destroy our relationship." "This isn't about Sarah," Michael replied. "This is about us. This is about the fact that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. I was protecting you. From what? From having a comfortable life? From not having to worry about money? From being proud of my successful mother instead of embarrassed by her?" Each word was like a knife in my heart. I had spent 30 years trying to do the right thing for my son, and instead I had hurt him in ways I never intended. "I was protecting you from becoming like them," I said, gesturing toward the Davidsons. "I was protecting you from thinking that money was the most important thing in life. But instead, you taught me that lies were acceptable as long as you thought they were for my own good," Michael said. "You taught me that I couldn't be trusted with the truth about my own life." I felt tears streaming down my face. "Michael, please. I know I made mistakes, but everything I did was because I love you." "I know you love me, Mom," he said, and his voice was gentle but firm. "But love isn't enough to fix this. You stole my childhood from me. You stole my right to know who I really was, where I really came from. You made me feel ashamed of things I had no reason to be ashamed of. And you gave him to me under false pretenses, Sarah added, and there was triumph in her voice. I married him thinking he came from a poor family. I made decisions about our future based on lies. Sarah, Michael said sharply, you need to stop talking. You've done enough damage tonight. I'm just saying that this affects me too, she said defensively. This affects our marriage. Our marriage was affected the moment you tried to blackmail my mother, Michael replied coldly. I'm not sure we have a marriage anymore. Sarah's face went white again. What do you mean? I mean that tonight, I've seen a side of you that I never knew existed. I've seen that you care more about money than you do about people. I've seen that you're willing to hurt my family to get what you want. I was hurt too, Sarah protested. I was embarrassed. I had a right to be upset. You had a right to be surprised, Michael corrected her. You had a right to ask questions. You didn't have a right to demand money or threaten my mother. I watched this exchange with a growing sense of horror. My revelation wasn't just destroying my relationship with my son. It was destroying his marriage, too. Sarah's greed and Michael's disillusionment were tearing apart what should have been the happiest day of their lives. Maybe we should all take some time to think about this, I suggested. Maybe we should finish the reception tonight and talk about everything else tomorrow when emotions aren't running so high. No, Michael said firmly. I can't go back in there and pretend to be happy. I can't dance with my wife and smile for pictures when everything in my life has just been turned upside down. So what are you saying? Sarah asked, and there was panic in her voice now. I'm saying I need some time to figure out who I really am, Michael replied. I'm saying I need to decide what I want my life to look like now that I know the truth. Our guests are waiting, Sarah said desperately. We have a reception to finish. We have a honeymoon to go on. We have a life to start together. Do we? Michael asked. Because right now I'm not sure what kind of life you actually want with me. Do you want a life with the man you married this afternoon, or do you want a life with the son of a billionaire? Sarah opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. We all knew what the answer was. That's what I thought, Michael said sadly. He turned to me and I could see the pain in his eyes. Mom, I need you to understand something. I love you and I forgive you for keeping this secret. I even understand why you did it. But I need time to process all of this. I need time to figure out how to be your son now that I know the truth. Of course, I said, though my heart was breaking. Take all the time you need. And I need you to promise me something, he continued. Anything. I need you to promise me that there are no more secrets, no more lies, no more half-truths, no more protecting me from things you think I can't handle. If we're going to have a relationship going forward, it has to be based on complete honesty. I promise, I said without hesitation. No more secrets. Michael nodded and then turned to his wife. Sarah, I'm going to stay at a hotel tonight. I think we both need some space to think about what happened here. You can't leave me on our wedding night, Sarah said, her voice rising to a shriek. What will people think? I don't care what people think, Michael replied. That's one thing I learned from my mother tonight. Other people's opinions don't matter as much as doing what's right. With that, he turned and walked back into the reception hall, leaving the rest of us standing on the terrace in stunned silence. Sarah immediately turned on me, her face twisted with rage. This is all your fault, she hissed. You've ruined my wedding. You've ruined my marriage. I didn't ruin anything, I said calmly. Your greed ruined it. Your decision to try to blackmail me ruined it. Your inability to accept my apology gracefully ruined it. Ladies, Richard Davidson interjected, trying to restore some peace. Perhaps we should all go inside and try to— No, I said firmly. I think I've done enough damage here tonight. I'm going to go home. Home to your mansion? Sarah asked spitefully. Home to my small apartment, I corrected her. The same apartment where I've lived for 20 years. Because unlike some people, I don't need expensive things to make me feel important. I started to walk toward the exit, but Patricia Davidson called after me. Eleanor, wait, she said, hurrying to catch up with me. I hope you'll forgive our behavior tonight. We were all just so surprised. Surprised that the woman you've been treating like dirt for 2 years turned out to be more successful than you? I asked. Yes, I imagine that was surprising. Patricia had the grace to look ashamed. We should have treated you better regardless of your circumstances. You're Michael's mother, and that should have been enough. It was the first genuine thing anyone from the Davidson family had said to me all evening, and I appreciated it even though it was too little, too late. Thank you for saying that, Patricia, I said. I hope someday we can start over. I hope so too, she replied. As I walked through the reception hall toward the exit, I could feel all eyes on me. The guests who had witnessed the drama on the terrace had spread the word, and now everyone knew that the poor secretary was actually a billionaire. Some people stared with curiosity, others with embarrassment at how they had treated me earlier in the evening. But I held my head high as I walked out. I had nothing to be ashamed of. I had built a successful company from nothing. I had raised a good son despite difficult circumstances. I had lived according to my values, even when it would have been easier to flaunt my wealth. The only thing I was ashamed of was the secret itself. Not the money, but the lies. Michael was right about that. I had stolen something from him by not trusting him with the truth. As I stood outside the country club waiting for a taxi, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in the span of a few hours. This morning I had been looking forward to my son's wedding, excited about welcoming Sarah into our family despite my reservations about her character. Tonight, my son was questioning everything he thought he knew about his life. His marriage was in trouble, and my secret was out. But as painful as it was, there was also something liberating about it. For 30 years, I had carried the burden of this secret alone. Now it was out in the open. And whatever happened next, at least it would be based on truth instead of lies. When the taxi arrived, I gave the driver my address and settled back in the seat. As we drove through the city toward my small apartment, I thought about what Michael had said about needing time to figure out who he really was. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent 30 years trying to make sure my son knew who he was. A hard-working, humble, grateful young man who understood the value of $1 and the importance of treating all people with respect. But by hiding my wealth from him, I had actually confused his sense of identity instead of clarifying it. Now he would have to reconcile the mother he thought he knew with the successful businesswoman I actually was. He would have to decide whether the values I had taught him were still meaningful now that he knew they came from someone who had billions of dollars in the bank. And I would have to figure out how to be his mother moving forward. How do you rebuild a relationship that has been based on a fundamental deception? How do you prove that your love was real, even though your circumstances were fake? As the taxi pulled up to my modest apartment building, I realized that the hardest part of my journey was just beginning. Keeping the secret had been difficult, but living with the consequences of revealing it was going to be even harder. But for the first time in 30 years, I was ready to face whatever came next with complete honesty. No more lies, no more half-truths, no more protecting people from reality. If Michael and I were going to have a relationship going forward, it would be built on truth, even if that truth was more painful than the lies had ever been. I paid the taxi driver and walked slowly up to my apartment, my simple blue dress rustling in the evening breeze. Tomorrow, I would have to figure out how to rebuild my life and my relationship with my son. Tomorrow, I would have to deal with the aftermath of Sarah's greed and Michael's disillusionment. But tonight, for the first time in 30 years, I could go to sleep without carrying the weight of my secret. Even though everything else in my life was falling apart, that small freedom felt like the most precious thing in the world. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my phone ringing. For a moment, lying in my small bed in my modest apartment, I almost convinced myself that the events of the previous night had been a terrible dream. But then I saw Sarah's name on my phone screen, and reality came crashing back. "Hello, Sarah," I said quietly, sitting up and rubbing my eyes. "Eleanor." Her voice was cold and formal. "We need to talk." "I imagine we do," I replied. "How are you feeling this morning?" "How do you think I'm feeling?" she snapped. "My husband left me on our wedding night. Half our guests think I'm a gold digger, and the other half think I'm an idiot. My parents are furious with me, and it's all because of your little secret." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "Sarah, what happened last night was unfortunate, but—" "Unfortunate?" she interrupted. "Unfortunate is spilling wine on a wedding dress. What happened last night was devastating." "You're right," I admitted. "It was devastating. For all of us. Michael is hurting, You're hurting, and I'm responsible for a lot of that pain." There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was different, less angry, more calculating. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," she said, "about destroying my family's reputation and shutting down my father's company." "Sarah." "No, let me finish. I was wrong to ask you for money. I was wrong to threaten you. I was angry and embarrassed, and I handled the situation badly." I was surprised by this admission. It sounded like Sarah might actually be ready to apologize properly. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "But I think we can work something out," Sarah continued. And there was that calculating tone again, something that would benefit both of us. My heart sank. Even after everything that had happened, Sarah was still thinking about how to profit from the situation. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean that you need me as much as I need you," Sarah said, her voice becoming more confident. "You want your son back, right? You want him to forgive you and have a relationship with you?" "Of course I do." "Well, I'm his wife. I have influence with him. I could help convince him to give you another chance, or I could make sure he stays angry with you forever." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Are you trying to blackmail me again, Sarah?" "I'm trying to propose a partnership," she said smoothly. "You help me save my marriage and my reputation, and I'll help you rebuild your relationship with Michael." "And how exactly would I help you save your marriage?" "Simple. You tell Michael that what happened last night was just a misunderstanding. You tell him that I was just shocked and confused, and that I didn't really mean what I said. You convince him that I'm a good person who just made a mistake." I was quiet for a long moment, processing what she was asking. "Sarah, I can't lie to my son anymore. I promised him complete honesty from now on." "This wouldn't be lying," Sarah said quickly. "This would be helping him see the situation from a different perspective." "It would be manipulating him," I corrected. "And after 30 years of keeping secrets, I won't do that anymore." Sarah's voice hardened again. "Then I guess you don't want your son back as much as you claim." "What do you mean?" "I mean that Michael is confused and hurt right now. He doesn't know what to think or who to trust. I could help him see that you were just trying to protect him, that your love for him is real, even if your circumstances were fake. Or I could make sure he focuses on how betrayed he feels, how his whole life has been built on lies." The threat was clear, even though Sarah was being more subtle about it than she had been the night before. She was offering to either help repair my relationship with Michael or to sabotage it completely. "Sarah," I said slowly, "let me ask you something. "Do you actually love my son?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "What kind of question is that? Of course I love him." "Do you love him, or do you love what he can give you now that you know about my money?" "I love Michael," she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "I married him, didn't I?" "You married him when you thought he was poor," I pointed out. "The question is whether you would still want to be married to him if I didn't have any money." "But you do have money," Sarah said, "lots of money. And Michael is your son, which means you see dollar signs when you look at him now," I finished. "Sarah, can you honestly tell me that your feelings about Michael haven't changed since you found out about my wealth?" Another long pause. "Everything's changed," she admitted finally. "Of course my feelings have changed. Our whole future has changed." "But have your feelings about Michael as a person changed? Do you love him more now, or do you just love what he represents?" "I don't know," Sarah said, and for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded completely honest. "I don't know how to separate the man from the money anymore." It was a heartbreaking admission, and it told me everything I needed to know about my son's marriage. "Sarah," I said gently, "I think you need to take some time to figure out what you really want, not what you want from Michael's connection to my money, but what you want from Michael himself." "What I want is to fix this mess," she said, her voice becoming desperate. "What I want is to have the wedding night I was supposed to have, and the honeymoon I was supposed to have, and the marriage I was supposed to have. But none of those things can happen until you and Michael work through what happened last night," I said. "And you can't work through it by asking me to lie for you or manipulate the situation." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Sarah asked, and she sounded very young suddenly, like a lost child. "You're supposed to be honest with him," I said. "You're supposed to tell him how you really feel about everything that's happened. You're supposed to figure out whether you want to be married to Michael or to Michael's inheritance. And if I choose wrong, if I'm honest and he still leaves me, then at least you'll know that any relationship you build going forward will be based on truth instead of manipulation." Sarah was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was small and defeated. "I don't think I know how to do that. I don't think I know how to be honest about this." "Why not?" "Because the truth is ugly," she admitted. "The truth is that when I found out about your money, the first thing I thought about wasn't how happy I was for Michael. The first thing I thought about was what it meant for me, what I could buy, where we could live, how my life was about to change." It was the most honest thing Sarah had ever said to me, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe she could still become the daughter-in-law I had wanted her to be. "Sarah," I said softly, "thank you for telling me that. That took courage." "It took desperation," she corrected. "I'm losing everything, Eleanor. My husband, my reputation, my future. I'm grasping at straws here." "You're not losing everything," I said. "You're losing the things that were built on false foundations. But you still have a chance to build something real with Michael, something based on who you both actually are." "But I don't know who I actually am anymore," Sarah said, and she started to cry. "I thought I was someone who could be happy with a simple life. I thought I was someone who loved Michael for himself, not for what he could give me. But last night proved that I'm not that person at all." "Last night proved that you're human," I said. "Everyone has selfish impulses, Sarah. Everyone thinks about how situations will affect them personally. The difference between good people and bad people isn't whether they have those thoughts. It's what they choose to do with them." "But I chose to try to blackmail you," she said through her tears. "I chose to demand money from you. I chose to threaten your family's reputation." "Yes, you did," I agreed. "But you can also choose to do better going forward. You can choose to apologize sincerely, not because you want something from me, but because you understand that what you did was wrong. And you think that will be enough? You think Michael will forgive me?" "I don't know," I said honestly. But I know that lies and manipulation won't work. The only chance you have is complete honesty, even if it's painful." Sarah cried quietly for a few minutes while I waited patiently on the other end of the line. Finally, she spoke again. "Eleanor, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you just pay me last night? $5 million is probably nothing to you. Why didn't you just give me the money and avoid all this drama?" It was a good question, and I thought about it carefully before answering. "Because paying you would have taught you that threatening people works," I said. "It would have taught you that you could manipulate and blackmail your way to whatever you wanted. And it would have taught Michael that his mother could be bought, that her love and respect could be purchased for the right price." "But wouldn't it have been easier?" "Much easier," I admitted. "But the right choice is rarely the easy choice, Sarah. If it were, everyone would make the right choice all the time." "I'm starting to understand why you kept your money secret for so long," Sarah said quietly. "People really do treat you differently when they know you're rich." "Some people do," I agreed. "But not everyone. Michael didn't treat me differently when he found out. He was hurt by the lies, but he didn't suddenly start asking for money or treating me like a bank account." "Michael's a better person than I am," Sarah said sadly. "Michael is a person who was raised with certain values," I corrected. "You can choose to embrace those same values, Sarah. It's not too late." "Even after everything I've done?" "Especially after everything you've done. The fact that you're questioning your behavior and feeling guilty about it proves that you have a conscience. You just need to listen to it." Sarah was quiet again for several minutes. When she finally spoke, her voice was determined. "Eleanor, I want to apologize to you properly. Not because I want something from you, but because I genuinely understand that what I did was wrong." "I'm listening." "I'm sorry for calling you a family embarrassment," she said, her voice steady and sincere. "You're not an embarrassment. You're an amazing woman who built something incredible from nothing. I'm sorry for trying to blackmail you and demand money from you. That was greedy and awful, and it went against everything I was raised to believe about right and wrong." She paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. "I'm sorry for hurting Michael on what should have been the happiest night of our lives. I'm sorry for making him question his relationship with you and his relationship with me. And I'm sorry for proving that you were right to be cautious about telling people about your wealth, because I became exactly the kind of person you were trying to protect Michael from." It was a real apology, one that acknowledged the full scope of her behavior and its impact on everyone involved. I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you, Sarah," I said. "That means more to me than you know." "Now I need to figure out how to apologize to Michael," she said. "And I need to figure out whether our marriage can survive what I've done." "What do you think?" I asked. "I think it depends on whether I can prove to him that I love him more than I love your money," Sarah said. "And honestly, I'm not sure I can prove that because I'm not sure it's true." Her honesty was painful but necessary. At least now we were dealing with reality instead of pretense. "Sarah," I said, "I want you to know that regardless of what happens between you and Michael, I don't want to see you hurt. You made mistakes last night, but you're not a bad person. You're just someone who got overwhelmed by greed and made some terrible choices." "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "After everything I said and did, why aren't you angry?" "Oh, I was angry," I said with a small laugh. "I was furious. But anger doesn't solve anything, and it doesn't help anyone. Besides, I understand what it's like to be tempted by money, to make choices based on fear and self-interest instead of doing what's right." "You do?" "Sarah, so I've been wealthy for 30 years. Do you think I never made mistakes? Do you think I never had moments where I was selfish or greedy or cruel?" I paused, thinking about some of my own past behavior. The difference is that I learned from those mistakes and tried to do better. "Will you tell me about some of them?" Sarah asked. Your mistakes, I mean. Maybe it would help me feel less terrible about mine. I considered her request. Sharing my failures wouldn't be easy, but it might help Sarah understand that good people can make bad choices and still find their way back to who they want to be. Well, I said slowly, there was the time about 15 years ago when a competitor was trying to steal one of my biggest clients. Instead of competing fairly on the merits of our respective products, I used my money and connections to spread rumors about their company's financial stability. I nearly destroyed their business out of spite. What happened? I realized what I was doing and stopped, I said. I apologized to the competitor and actually ended up recommending them for several contracts I couldn't take on myself. We became friends, and his company is still thriving today. That doesn't sound so terrible, Sarah said. It was terrible because I was using my power to hurt someone instead of to help, I replied. I was acting like the worst kind of rich person, someone who crushes others just because they can. But you stopped. You made it right. Eventually. But the point is that having money doesn't automatically make you a good person or a bad person. It just gives you more power to be whichever one you choose to be. Sarah was quiet, processing this. Eleanor, can I ask you for one more thing? I tensed, wondering if she was about to make another inappropriate request. What is it? Will you talk to Michael for me? Not to lie for me or manipulate him, but just to tell him that you think I might be capable of change. That you think our marriage might be worth saving? It was a reasonable request, and I could see that Sarah was genuinely trying to do better. But I also knew that my son needed to make his own decisions about his marriage. I'll talk to Michael, I said carefully, but I won't try to influence his decision. I'll tell him that we talked, that you apologized sincerely, and that you're taking time to think about what you really want. But ultimately, he needs to decide for himself whether he can trust you and whether he wants to work on your marriage. That's fair, Sarah said. That's more than I deserve, honestly. Everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes, Sarah. The question is what you're going to do with that chance. After I hung up with Sarah, I sat in my small kitchen drinking coffee and thinking about the conversation. Despite everything that had happened, I found myself hoping that she and Michael could work things out. Not because I thought Sarah was perfect, but because I believed people could change if they truly wanted to. My phone rang again, and this time it was Michael. Hi, Mom, he said, and his voice sounded tired and sad. Hi, sweetheart, how are you doing? I've been better, he admitted. I didn't sleep much last night. I kept thinking about everything that happened. I'm so sorry, Michael. I know this is all my fault. It's not all your fault, he said, surprising me. Sarah made her own choices last night. You didn't force her to try to blackmail you. But if I had been honest with you from the beginning, then maybe Sarah would have shown her true colors sooner, Michael interrupted. Maybe this is better, Mom. Maybe it's better that I found out what she's really like now, instead of years down the road. How do you feel about her now? I asked gently. Michael sighed deeply. I don't know. I'm angry, obviously. I'm hurt that she would try to extort money from my mother, but I'm also sad, because I thought I knew who she was, and it turns out I was wrong. Maybe you weren't entirely wrong, I suggested. Maybe Sarah is both the person you fell in love with and the person who made those terrible choices last night. Maybe people are more complicated than we sometimes want to admit. Did she call you? Michael asked. Yes, this morning. She apologized. A real apology, not like the forced one from last night. What did she say? I told Michael about my conversation with Sarah, being careful to present her words honestly, without editorializing, or trying to influence his feelings about them. When I finished, Michael was quiet for a long time. So, she admitted that she doesn't know if she loves me or your money more. She admitted that she's confused about her feelings, I said, which is honest, at least. Honest, Michael repeated bitterly. There's that word again. Everyone's being so honest all of a sudden. Michael, no, Mom, I'm glad we're being honest. I'm glad Sarah is being honest. I just wish we could have been honest before I married her. What are you going to do? I asked. I don't know, he said. Part of me wants to get the marriage annulled and pretend last night never happened. Part of me thinks I should give her a chance to prove that she can change. And part of me is wondering if I can ever trust anyone again. You can trust me, I said quietly. Can I? Michael asked, and his words stung. Mom, I love you, but you lied to me for my entire life. How do I know you won't lie to me again if you think it's for my own good? Because I promised you I wouldn't, I said, and because I've learned that protecting you from the truth doesn't actually protect you at all. It just delays the pain and makes it worse when it finally comes out. I want to believe that, Michael said. I really do. But trust isn't something you can just decide to feel. It has to be rebuilt over time. I understand, I said, even though it broke my heart. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back, Michael. Whatever it takes, and however long it takes. I know you will, Mom, and I want our relationship to work, but right now, I need some space to figure out who I am now that I know the truth about our family. Of course, I said, trying to keep the sadness out of my voice. Take all the time you need. There's something else, Michael said. I need to know about the money. What do you mean? I mean, I need to know what having a billionaire mother means for my life going forward. Am I supposed to inherit this fortune someday? Am I supposed to work for your company? Am I supposed to change how I live my life? These were all questions I had been dreading, but they were fair questions that deserved honest answers. The company will be yours someday if you want it, I said, but only if you want it. I won't force you to take over Watson Business Solutions if you'd rather do something else with your life. What if I want nothing to do with the money? Michael asked. What if I want to keep living like I always have? Then that's your choice, I replied. I'll respect whatever decision you make. Even if I decide to give it all away? Even then. It's your inheritance, Michael. When the time comes, you can do whatever you think is right with it. Michael was quiet again. I keep thinking about all the times I felt embarrassed about our life, he said finally. All the times I wished we had more money. All the times I felt inferior to my friends whose families were wealthy. And now I find out we were wealthier than any of them. I'm sorry, I said. I'm so sorry you went through that, especially knowing now that it was unnecessary. The thing is, Mom, I think I'm glad I went through it. This surprised me. What do you mean? I mean that feeling embarrassed about money, feeling like I had to work hard for everything I wanted, feeling grateful for small things. I think that made me a better person than I would have been if I'd grown up knowing we were rich. Really? Look at how Sarah acted when she found out about your money, Michael said. Look at how her whole personality changed in an instant. Maybe if I'd grown up with wealth, I would have turned out like that too. You would never turn out like that, I said firmly. You have too much of your father in you. Maybe, or maybe I would have been worse. Maybe I would have been one of those spoiled rich kids who thinks the world owes them everything. It was ironic that Michael was coming to the same conclusion I had reached 30 years earlier, that growing up with money might have changed him for the worse. But hearing him say it brought me no comfort, only sadness that he'd had to suffer unnecessarily. I just wish there had been a way to teach you those values without lying to you, I said. Maybe there wasn't, Michael said. Maybe the lie was necessary to make me who I am today. I don't know, Mom. I'm still trying to figure it all out. We'll figure it out together, I said. When you're ready? I hope so, Michael said. I really hope so. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling overwhelmed by everything that had changed in less than 24 hours. My secret was out. My relationship with my son was damaged. His marriage was in trouble, and I had no idea what was going to happen next. But as I sat there in my simple kitchen, wearing my old robe and drinking coffee from a chipped mug, I realized something important. I was still the same person I had always been. The money hadn't changed my fundamental nature any more than revealing it had. I was still Eleanor, the woman who had built a business from nothing, who had raised a good son despite difficult circumstances, who had tried to live according to her values, even when it would have been easier to do otherwise. The only difference now was that everyone else knew who I really was too, and maybe, in the long run, that would turn out to be a good thing. Maybe living authentically, even if it was more complicated, would be better than living with the constant weight of deception. As I got dressed for the day, I made a decision. I was going to stop hiding. I was going to stop pretending to be poor Eleanor, the secretary. If people wanted to treat me differently because of my wealth, that was their choice. But I wasn't going to lie about who I was anymore. It was time to find out what my life looked like when it was built on truth instead of secrets, even if the truth turned out to be more painful than the lies had ever been. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, and life had settled into a strange, new routine. I was still living in my small apartment, still taking the bus to work, still shopping at the same modest stores I'd always frequented. But now, people knew who I really was, and everything felt different, even when nothing had actually changed. The hardest part was the silence from Michael. He had called a few times in those first days after the wedding. Short conversations where we talked about practical things, but avoided the deeper issues between us. Then the calls stopped altogether. I understood that he needed space, but the absence of my son's voice in my life felt like a physical ache. I was sitting in my office at Watson Business Solutions, the first time I'd actually been to the corporate headquarters in months, when my assistant knocked on the door. "Mrs. Watson?" she said tentatively. "There's someone here to see you." "She says she's your daughter-in-law?" My heart jumped. "Send her in, please." Sarah walked into my office looking very different from the confident bride I'd seen 3 weeks earlier. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, she wore jeans and a plain sweater, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She looked tired and uncertain, like she'd been carrying a heavy burden. "Hello, Eleanor," she said quietly. "Sarah, this is a surprise. Please sit down." I gestured to one of the comfortable chairs in front of my desk. "How are you?" "I've been better," she said, with a weak smile. "I'm sure you've heard that Michael and I are separated." I had heard, through a mutual friend who'd thought I should to know. The news had broken my heart, but I hadn't wanted to intrude by asking Michael about it directly. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know how much you both wanted your marriage to work." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Did we? I'm not sure anymore. I think maybe we wanted the idea of marriage to work, but we never really knew each other well enough to make the reality work." "What brings you here today?" I asked gently. "I wanted to return this," Sarah said, pulling a small velvet box from her purse and placing it on my desk. "Michael's wedding ring. He left it at the apartment when he moved out, and I thought you should have it." I stared at the box, feeling a wave of sadness wash over me. "Sarah, that ring belongs to Michael, not to me. You should give it back to him directly." "He won't see me," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "He won't take my calls. He won't answer my emails. He won't meet me for coffee. I've tried everything, Eleanor. He's completely shut me out." "I'm sorry," I said again. "I know how painful that must be." "The thing is," Sarah continued, "I understand why he's doing it. After what I did at the wedding, after the things I said and the way I acted, I probably deserve to be cut off." "Nobody deserves to be completely cut off," I said. "People make mistakes, Sarah. Even terrible mistakes can sometimes be forgiven if the person is genuinely sorry and willing to change." "Are they?" Sarah asked, looking directly into my eyes. Can terrible mistakes really be forgiven? Because I've been thinking about that a lot these past few weeks, and I'm not sure I believe it anymore. What do you mean? Sarah shifted in her chair, seeming to choose her words carefully. I mean that some mistakes reveal things about a person's character that can't be undone. When I tried to blackmail you, when I demanded money from you, I showed Michael who I really am underneath all the pretense. And maybe that person isn't someone worth forgiving. Sarah! No, let me finish, she said, holding up a hand. I've spent these past 3 weeks really examining my behavior, not just at the wedding, but throughout our entire relationship. And I've realized some things about myself that I don't like very much. I waited for her to continue, sensing that she needed to get these thoughts out. I realized that I did treat you badly from the very beginning, Sarah said. Not because you were poor, but because you were humble. I was raised to value status and appearance and social position, and you represented everything I'd been taught to look down on. You were quiet instead of flashy, simple instead of sophisticated, genuine instead of polished. She paused, taking a shaky breath. And when I found out you were actually more successful than anyone in my family, my first thought wasn't admiration or respect. It was anger. I was angry that you had made me look foolish by being better than me while refusing to act like it. You weren't foolish for not knowing about my wealth, I said. I went to great lengths to hide it. But I was foolish for thinking that wealth was what made someone worth respecting in the first place, Sarah replied. I was foolish for believing that a person's bank account was more important than their character. It was painful to hear, but I appreciated her honesty. Sarah, recognizing these patterns in yourself is the first step toward changing them. Is it, though? Sarah asked. Because I've been trying to change for 3 weeks, and I still catch myself thinking the same terrible thoughts. I still notice how much people's clothes cost when I meet them. I still judge people based on where they live and what they drive and how they talk. Change takes time, I said. It's not something that happens overnight. How much time? Sarah asked, and there was desperation in her voice. Because Michael is moving on with his life without me, and I'm afraid that by the time I figure out how to be a better person, it'll be too late to save our marriage. Maybe, I said carefully, the focus shouldn't be on saving your marriage. Maybe the focus should be on becoming the person you want to be, regardless of what happens with Michael. Sarah stared at me for a moment, then started to cry. Not the angry tears from the wedding night, but deep, heartbroken sobs that seemed to come from somewhere very deep inside her. I don't know who I want to be, she said through her tears. I thought I knew, but it turns out I was wrong about that too. I thought I wanted to be successful and sophisticated and admired by everyone. But when I got a taste of real success through your money, it felt empty. It felt meaningless. I moved from behind my desk to sit in the chair next to her, offering her tissues from the box I kept nearby. Sarah, I said gently, can I tell you something that might help? She nodded, wiping her eyes. When I first started making money from my business, I went through a period where I was exactly like you described. I was obsessed with status and appearances. I bought expensive clothes and fancy cars and a big house, and I looked down on people who had less than I did. Sarah looked up at me with surprise. You did? Oh, yes. For about 2 years, I was everything I came to despise about wealthy people. I was arrogant and materialistic and cruel. I treated people badly because I could afford to, and I justified it by telling myself I'd earned the right to be superior. What changed? Robert died, I said simply. My husband died, and suddenly all the expensive things I'd surrounded myself with felt meaningless. They couldn't bring him back. They couldn't comfort me when I was grieving. They couldn't love me or support me or make me feel less alone. I took a tissue for myself. remembering those dark days after Robert's accident. That's when I realized that the only things that really matter are the relationships we build and the kindness we show to others. Everything else is just decoration. So, you sold everything and moved into that little apartment? Sarah asked. Eventually, yes. It took me a few years to fully embrace a simpler lifestyle, but gradually I got rid of all the trappings of wealth and focused on living according to my values instead of my bank account. And you were happier that way? Much happier, I said. But more importantly, I was a better person. I was the kind of person Robert would have been proud to be married to, the kind of person I wanted to raise Michael to become. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing what I'd told her. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. Eleanor, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you think Michael would have been happier if you'd stayed wealthy on the outside too? If you'd raised him with money and luxury and all the things wealth can buy? It was a question I'd asked myself countless times over the years. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe he would have been happier in some ways. He certainly would have been spared the embarrassment he felt about our modest lifestyle. But I think he would have been a very different person. And I'm not sure he would have been a better person. What do you mean? I mean that struggling a little bit, having to work for things, learning to appreciate simple pleasures, I think those experiences shaped Michael into someone who has empathy and humility and strength. If he'd grown up with unlimited money, he might have turned out to be entitled and shallow. Like me, Sarah said quietly. You're not shallow, Sarah. You're just confused about what matters. There's a difference. Is there? Because I married your son partly because I thought he came from good stock, if that makes sense. His values, his work ethic, his kindness, those were attractive qualities to me. But then, when I found out about your money, those qualities became less important than what he could inherit. But now you recognize that, I pointed out. Now you see that his character is more valuable than his potential inheritance. That's growth, Sarah. It might be too little too late, she said sadly. Before I could respond, there was another knock on my office door. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Mrs. Watson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your son is here. Should I send him in? My heart started racing. Michael was here? I glanced at Sarah, who had gone pale. Does he know I'm here? Sarah asked quietly. Michael? I said into the intercom. Did you know Sarah was here? Yes, came Michael's voice, muffled but clear enough to understand. I saw her car in the parking lot. I'd like to speak with both of you, ma'am, if that's okay. Sarah and I looked at each other. I could see fear and hope warring in her expression. Send him in, I said. Michael walked into my office looking older than he had just 3 weeks ago. The stress of the separation was evident in the lines around his eyes and the tension in his shoulders. He was dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt, and he looked tired. Hello, Mom, he said, giving me a brief hug. Sarah. Hello, Michael, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm glad you're both here, Michael said, taking a seat across from us. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few weeks, and I've reached some conclusions that I wanted to share with both of you. I felt my stomach clench with nervousness. Whatever Michael had to say, I could tell it was important. First, Mom, Michael said, turning to me, I want you to know that I've forgiven you for keeping the secret about your wealth. I understand why you did it, and while I wish you'd trusted me with the truth sooner, I can see that you were trying to protect me and teach me values. Relief flooded through me. Thank you, Michael. That means everything to me. I also want you to know that I'm proud of you, Michael continued. Not because you're wealthy, but because of how you became wealthy and what you've done with that wealth. Building a successful company from nothing while raising a child alone, that's incredible, Mom. You should be celebrated, not hidden. Tears started flowing down my cheeks. These were words I'd been hoping to hear for 30 years. And Sarah, Michael said, turning to his wife, I want you to know that I've forgiven you too. Sarah's eyes went wide with shock. You have. I have. What you did at the wedding was wrong, and it hurt me deeply. But I've realized that it also revealed something important, that you were struggling with the same questions about money and values that I was. You just handled it badly. Michael, Sarah started to say, but he held up a hand. Let me finish, please. I've forgiven you, but that doesn't mean I think we should get back together. At least not right now. Sarah's face crumpled, but she nodded, trying to compose herself. The truth is, Michael continued, I don't think either of us really knew who we were when we got married. I thought I was the poor son of a secretary, and you thought you were marrying into a struggling family. Now we both have to figure out who we actually are and what we actually want from life. What does that mean for our marriage? Sarah asked quietly. It means I think we should get divorced, Michael said, and the words hit the room like a physical blow. Not out of anger or spite, but because I think we both need to discover ourselves as individuals before we can be healthy partners to anyone. Sarah started crying again, but she nodded through her tears. I understand, she said. I don't like it, but I understand. I'm not saying we can never be together again, Michael added gently. I'm just saying that right now, we both have work to do on ourselves. Maybe someday, when we've both figured out who we really are and what we really want, we can try again. But I can't make any promises about that. That's fair, Sarah said, wiping her eyes. It's more than fair, actually. It's more grace than I deserve. Everyone deserves grace, Sarah. Everyone deserves a chance to grow and change. Michael turned back to me. Mom, there's something I want to ask you. Anything, I said. I want to come work for Watson Business Solutions. This was not what I'd expected him to say, and I was caught completely off guard. You do? I've been thinking about what I want to do with my life, and I realize I want to be part of something meaningful. Your company helps small businesses succeed. That's exactly the kind of work I want to be doing. Michael, you don't have to work for my company just because... I'm not doing it just because you're my mother, Michael interrupted. I'm doing it because I believe in what the company stands for. I want to help build something that makes a difference in people's lives. What about your job at the marketing firm? I'll give my notice tomorrow. That job was never really what I wanted. It was just what I thought I could get with my degree and my background. Now I want to do something that actually matters to me. I felt a surge of pride and excitement. Having Michael work alongside me had always been a dream, but I'd never wanted to pressure him into it. We'd have to start you in an entry-level position, I said. I won't give you special treatment, just because you're my son. I wouldn't want you to, Michael said with a smile. I want to earn my place in the company just like everyone else. And you'd have to learn the business from the ground up. Software development, client relations, financial management. It's a lot to learn. I'm ready to learn, Michael said. I'm ready to work hard and prove myself. Sarah had been listening to this exchange with a wistful expression on her face. I'm happy for you, Michael, she said. It sounds like you're finally figuring out what you want from life. What about you, Sarah? Michael asked. What do you want from life? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. Honestly, I think I want to learn how to be happy without needing to impress anyone. I want to learn how to value people for who they are instead of what they have. I want to become someone worthy of the grace you've shown me today. How are you going to do that? I asked gently. I don't know yet, Sarah admitted. Maybe I'll do some volunteer work. Try to help people who are actually struggling instead of just worrying about my own social status. Maybe I'll go back to school and study something that actually interests me instead of something that sounds prestigious. Those are good ideas, Michael said. And Sarah, I hope you'll keep me updated on how you're doing. Even if we're not married anymore, I still care about you. I still want you to be happy." "Thank you," Sarah said, fresh tears streaming down her face. "That means more to me than you know." The three of us sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, processing everything that had been said. It felt like we had all finally been completely honest with each other, and while the truth was painful in some ways, it was also liberating. "There's one more thing," Michael said eventually. "Mom, I want you to stop hiding who you are." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want you to move out of that tiny apartment and into a house that reflects your success. I want you to stop taking the bus when you could afford to buy a car dealership. I want you to stop pretending to be poor when you're actually one of the most successful businesswomen in the country." "Michael, I live simply because I believe in—" "I know what you believe in, Mom, and I agree with those values. But there's a difference between living simply and living in denial. You can still be humble and kind and generous without pretending to be someone you're not." I thought about what he was saying. "You really think I should change how I live?" "I think you should live authentically," Michael said. "You should live in a way that reflects both your values and your circumstances. You can have a nice house and still be a good person. You can drive a decent car and still treat everyone with respect. You can dress well and still care more about character than appearance." "He's right," Sarah added. "Eleanor, you taught me that money doesn't have to change who you are on the inside. But maybe it's okay to let it change some things on the outside as long as your heart stays the same." I looked at these two young people who had both grown so much in just a few weeks, and I realized they were both wiser than I had given them credit for. "You know what?" I said with a smile. "Maybe it is time for some changes. Maybe it's time for me to stop being afraid of my own success." "Does that mean you'll move out of that apartment?" Michael asked hopefully. "Maybe," I said. "But if I do, it won't be into some massive mansion. It'll be into a home that's comfortable and welcoming, a place where people feel valued regardless of their bank accounts." "That sounds perfect," Michael said. "And Sarah," I said, turning to my soon-to-be former daughter-in-law, "I want you to know that even though your marriage to Michael is ending, you'll always be family to me. If you need anything, advice, support, or just someone to talk to, I'm here." Sarah's face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, Eleanor. I don't deserve your kindness, but I'm grateful for it." "Everyone deserves kindness," I said. "That's one lesson I hope you'll remember as you figure out who you want to become." As we prepared to leave my office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 30 years. Complete peace with who I was and where my life was headed. My secret was out, my relationship with my son was healing, and I was finally ready to stop hiding from my own success. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Michael would have to learn the business. Sarah would have to rebuild her character, and I would have to learn how to be authentically wealthy instead of secretly wealthy. But for the first time in decades, I felt like we were all moving in the right direction. As we walked out of the office building together, Michael put his arm around my shoulders. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said, "for everything you've built, everything you've accomplished, and everything you've taught me." "I'm proud of you too," I replied, "for the man you've become and the man you're still becoming." Sarah walked beside us, and though she looked sad about the end of her marriage, there was also something hopeful in her expression. She was finally free to discover who she really was, without the pressure of trying to maintain a relationship that had been built on false foundations. The future was uncertain, but it was built on truth instead of lies. And after 30 years of secrets, that felt like the greatest gift of all. As we reached the parking lot, I made a decision that surprised even me. "Sarah," I said, "would you like to come house hunting with Michael and me this weekend? I could use a woman's perspective. And I think you have good taste when you're not worried about impressing anyone." Sarah's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. "I'd love to," she said. "Thank you for including me." "We're family," I said simply. "Family sticks together, even when relationships change." And as we stood there in the late afternoon sun, three people who had been brought together by lies and torn apart by truth, I realized that we were finally ready to build something real together, something based on honesty, kindness, and the understanding that people can change if they're willing to do the work. It had taken 30 years and a disastrous wedding night, but finally we were all free to be exactly who we were meant to be. 2 years had passed since that conversation in my office, and as I stood in the garden of my new home, I marveled at how much all our lives had changed. The house wasn't a mansion. It was a comfortable, welcoming place with large windows, beautiful gardens, and enough space for the family gatherings I'd always dreamed of hosting. It was elegant without being ostentatious, successful without being flashy. It was, I realized, a perfect reflection of who I had become. Michael was due to arrive any moment for our weekly Sunday dinner. He had thrown himself into learning the business with a passion that reminded me of myself 30 years earlier. He started in customer service, then moved to sales, then to project management. Now, he was leading our expansion into new markets, and his natural empathy and business instincts were making him invaluable to the company. More importantly, he had found his calling in helping small businesses succeed, and I could see the satisfaction it gave him every day. Sarah pulled into the driveway just as I was setting the table on the back patio. She looked radiant in a simple sundress, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face glowing with genuine happiness. The transformation in her over the past 2 years had been remarkable to witness. "Eleanor," she called out, walking through the gate with a covered dish in her hands. "I brought the dessert you requested, homemade apple pie, just like you taught me." "How did it turn out?" I asked, giving her a warm hug. "Better than last time, I think. I'm finally getting the hang of that crust recipe." Sarah laughed, and the sound was light and genuine, so different from the forced laughter I remembered from before. Though I have to admit, I never thought I'd find so much joy in baking. Sarah had kept her word about changing her life. She'd left her job at the high-end fashion boutique and enrolled in social work school. She was now in her final semester and had been volunteering at a women's shelter, helping women rebuild their lives after leaving abusive relationships. The work had changed her profoundly, giving her perspective on what real problems looked like and what genuine strength meant. "How are things at the shelter?" I asked as we arranged the food on the outdoor table. "Challenging but rewarding," Sarah said. "We got a new resident this week, a young mother with 2 small children. She'd been afraid to leave her husband because she didn't think she could support herself and her kids. But we're going to help her find job training and housing assistance." "That must feel incredibly meaningful," I said. "It does. You know, Eleanor, I used to think success meant impressing other people. Now I realize success means making a difference in someone else's life, even if nobody ever knows you did it." It was exactly the kind of wisdom I had hoped she would find, and I felt proud of her growth. Michael arrived, and just as we were finishing the table preparations, he looked healthy and happy, with a confidence that came from knowing he was exactly where he belonged in life. Behind him walked someone I hadn't expected to see, a young woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Mom, Sarah," Michael said, "I'd like you to meet Jessica. Jessica, this is my mother Eleanor, and this is Sarah." Jessica stepped forward with a bright smile. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you both. Michael talks about you constantly." I studied this young woman carefully. She was pretty but not flashy, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater that looked like they came from a regular department store. There was something genuine and grounded about her that I immediately liked. "Jessica teaches 3rd grade at an elementary school downtown," Michael explained. "We met at a coffee shop near the office about 6 months ago." "6 months?" Sarah asked with a teasing grin. And you're just introducing her to us now? Michael blushed slightly. I wanted to make sure it was serious before I brought her into the family drama, he said with a laugh. Is it serious? I asked gently. Michael looked at Jessica with an expression I had never seen on his face during his marriage to Sarah. Pure, uncomplicated love, mixed with deep respect. Yes, he said simply. It's serious. As we sat down to dinner, I watched the interactions between all of us with fascination. Jessica asked thoughtful questions about Sarah's social work studies and listened with genuine interest to her answers. Sarah, for her part, seemed completely comfortable with Michael's new relationship, even offering Jessica advice about dealing with Michael's tendency to overwork. So, Jessica, I said, as we started on the main course, what do you think of Michael's career change? He gave up a perfectly good marketing job to start over at his mother's company. Jessica smiled. I think he's incredibly brave. It takes courage to start over in your late 20s, especially when you're learning a completely new industry. But I've never seen anyone more passionate about their work than Michael is about Watson Business Solutions. What is it that attracts you to him? Sarah asked. And I was surprised by the directness of the question. But there was no jealousy in her voice, just genuine curiosity. Jessica thought for a moment before answering. His kindness, she said simply. Michael is the kindest person I've ever known. He treats everyone with respect, from the CEO of a major client company to the janitor who cleans our school. He volunteers at a literacy program on weekends. He always remembers the names of people's children, and he never makes anyone feel small or unimportant. I felt tears prick my eyes. This was exactly the kind of man I had hoped my son would become. Plus, Jessica added with a grin, he makes me laugh every single day. What about his family situation? I asked carefully. Some people might find it intimidating to date someone whose mother is, well, financially successful. Jessica looked puzzled. Why would that be intimidating? You're successful because you're brilliant and hardworking. That's something to be proud of, not intimidated by. But doesn't the money change things? Sarah pressed. Doesn't it make you think about what your life could be like if you married into this family? Not really, Jessica said honestly. I mean, it's nice that Michael doesn't have to worry about student loans or whether he can afford to fix his car when it breaks down. But his character isn't different because his mother is wealthy. He's still the same person who saves his lunch money to buy supplies for his literacy students. Michael reached over and took Jessica's hand. See why I love her? He said to us. Actually, I do, Sarah said with a warm smile. Jessica, you're exactly what Michael deserves. You see him for who he is, not what he could give you. Speaking of what people deserve, Jessica said. Sarah, Michael told me about your divorce and how you've turned your life around. I think what you're doing with your social work is incredible. It takes real strength to admit your mistakes and then do the hard work to change. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. As the evening progressed, I found myself marveling at how different this gathering was from that disastrous wedding reception 2 years earlier. Here were 4 people who had been through tremendous pain and growth, who had learned hard lessons about honesty and values, and who had emerged stronger and wiser. After dinner, Michael asked if he could speak to me privately. We walked out to the garden while Jessica and Sarah cleaned up the dishes, chatting like old friends. Mom, Michael said, I have something important to ask you. What is it, sweetheart? Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I want to ask Jessica to marry me, but before I do, I need to know that you approve of her. I looked at this young man who had grown so much over the past 2 years, who had found his purpose in life and his perfect partner, and I felt overwhelming pride and joy. Michael, I said softly, I think Jessica is wonderful. She's kind, she's genuine, She loves you for exactly who you are, and she makes you happy. What more could a mother ask for?" "Are you sure?" Michael asked. "I know how the last wedding turned out." "The last wedding turned out exactly as it needed to," I said firmly. "It revealed truths that needed to be revealed and started all of us on journeys we needed to take. This is completely different, Michael. You and Jessica are completely different." Michael smiled with relief. "I'm going to ask her next weekend. I want to take her to the place where we first met, that little coffee shop downtown." "That sounds perfect," I said. "Simple and meaningful, just like the two of you." "There's something else," Michael said. "I want you to know that Jessica and I have talked about your wealth, and we've agreed that we don't want any of it to change how we live our lives. We want to earn our own way, build our own future." "I would expect nothing less from you," I said. "But Michael, when the time comes, you'll inherit Watson Business Solutions whether you want to or not. It's your legacy, your father's legacy. What will you do with it?" Michael was quiet for a moment, looking out over the garden. "I'll run it the way you taught me to. I'll use it to help people, to create opportunities for others, to make a positive difference in the world. And I'll pass those same values on to my children someday." "That's all I've ever wanted," I said, pulling my son into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of the man you've become, Michael. Your father would be proud too." We walked back toward the patio, where we found Sarah and Jessica deep in conversation about Sarah's work at the women's shelter. "Eleanor," Jessica was saying, "Sarah was just telling me about the job training programs at the shelter. It sounds like they could use some additional funding for computer equipment." "I'd be happy to help with that," I said. "Sarah, why don't you put together a proposal and send it to me?" "Are you sure?" Sarah asked. "I know you already donate to dozens of charities." "I'm sure. Helping women rebuild their lives after leaving abusive situations is exactly the kind of work I want to support." As the evening wound down and it was time for everyone to leave, Sarah pulled me aside for a private moment. "Eleanor," she said, "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for me over the past 2 years. Not just the financial support for my education, but the emotional support. The way you welcomed me back into the family even after everything I did." "Sarah, you're like a daughter to me," I said. "That didn't change when your marriage to Michael ended. Family isn't just about legal documents. It's about love and support and being there for each other." "I have something to tell you," Sarah said, her eyes bright with excitement. "I've been seeing someone." "Oh?" I said, smiling at her obvious happiness. "His name is David, and he's a teacher at the middle school near the shelter. We met when I was helping one of our residents enroll her son in school there." "What's he like?" "He's wonderful," Sarah said, her face glowing. "He's kind and patient, and he cares about his students more than anything. He drives an old Honda Civic and lives in a tiny apartment, and he's the happiest person I've ever known." "And how do you feel about his financial situation?" I asked gently, remembering Sarah's old obsession with wealth and status. Sarah laughed. "You know what? I love it. I love that he chooses to teach because he's passionate about education, not because he wants to get rich. I love that he budgets carefully so he can buy supplies for his students. I love that he measures success by how many kids he helps graduate, not by how much money he makes." "That's wonderful, Sarah. I'm happy for you." "The best part is," Sarah continued, "he has no idea about my connection to you or your wealth. He fell in love with me thinking I'm just a social work student who volunteers at a shelter, and I want to keep it that way, at least until I'm sure about our relationship." "That sounds very wise," I said, proud of how much Sarah had learned about the importance of being loved for who you are, rather than what you can provide. As everyone prepared to leave, Michael made an announcement. "Before we all go," he said, "I wanted to share some news about the company. We just signed our biggest client ever, a chain of small hardware stores that wants to implement our inventory management system in all 50 of their locations." "Michael, that's wonderful," I said, beaming with pride. "It means we'll need to hire 20 new employees over the next 6 months," Michael continued. "We're officially too big for our current office space." "Sounds like Watson Business Solutions needs a new headquarters," I said. "Already found one," Michael said with a grin. "There's a beautiful building downtown with space for all our current employees, plus room to grow. Great natural light, close to public transportation, and a community garden on the roof where employees can grow vegetables during their lunch breaks." "You've thought of everything," I said with a laugh. "I learned from the best," Michael replied, giving me another hug. As I stood on my front porch waving goodbye to Michael, Jessica, and Sarah, I felt a profound sense of completion. The scared young woman who had built a business from nothing while hiding her success had finally learned how to live authentically. The son who had grown up thinking he was poor had found his true calling and his perfect partner. And the daughter-in-law, who had once been consumed by greed, had transformed herself into someone who found joy in serving others. It had taken 30 years, a disastrous wedding, a painful separation, and countless difficult conversations to get here. But finally, we were all exactly where we belonged. I walked back into my house, not the tiny apartment where I had hidden for so long, but the comfortable home that reflected both my success and my values, and settled into my favorite chair with a cup of tea. Tomorrow I would go to the office and continue building the company that had started as a dream in a cramped kitchen. I would work alongside my son to help small businesses succeed, and I would use my wealth to support causes that mattered to me. But tonight, I would simply sit in my beautiful living room and reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The journey from scared young widow to successful businesswoman, to proud mother, to authentic human being who had finally learned how to be wealthy without losing her soul. The road had been long and sometimes painful, but every step had been worth it to reach this moment of perfect peace and genuine happiness. 6 months later, I received a call that I had been both expecting and dreading. Michael was on the other end of the line, his voice shaking with excitement and nerves. "Mom," he said. "She said yes." "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said, my heart overflowing with joy. "I'm so happy for both of you." "We want to have a small ceremony," Michael said. "Just family and close friends. No country club, no elaborate reception, just a simple celebration of our love." "That sounds perfect," I said. "And Mom, we want you to walk me down the aisle. You're the one who raised me, who taught me what love really means. It should be you." I started crying then. Happy tears that came from a place of pure gratitude for how beautifully everything had turned out. The wedding took place in the garden of my home on a perfect spring day. Jessica looked radiant in a simple white dress that she had bought at a department store, and Michael looked handsome and peaceful in a suit that fit him perfectly. Sarah was there with David, who turned out to be every bit as wonderful as she had described. My employees from Watson Business Solutions were there, along with Jessica's fellow teachers, and some of the families from Michael's literacy program. As I walked my son down the aisle, I thought about Robert and how proud he would have been of the man Michael had become. I thought about the young woman I had been 30 years earlier, so afraid of what money might do to the people she loved. And I thought about all the lessons we had learned about the difference between having wealth and being defined by it. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. Michael and Jessica exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other's dreams, to always choose kindness over pride, and to measure their success by the love they shared and the good they did in the world. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the entire gathering erupted in joyful cheers. As Michael and Jessica kissed, I saw Sarah wiping tears from her eyes, not tears of sadness or regret, but tears of genuine happiness for the man she had once been married to and the woman who was perfect for him. During the reception, which consisted of a simple dinner on my patio, followed by dancing in the garden, I found myself talking with David, Sarah's boyfriend. He was exactly as she had described him: kind, genuine, passionate about his work, and completely uninterested in material possessions. "Sarah tells me you're a teacher," I said. "Middle school math," David replied with a smile. "Best job in the world, even if it doesn't pay much." "What makes it the best job in the world?" I asked. "Yesterday, a kid who's been struggling with fractions all year finally got it. You should have seen the look on his face when everything clicked. That moment, that's worth more than any amount of money." I liked this young man immediately. He had the same values that I had tried so hard to instill in Michael, the same understanding that true wealth comes from making a difference in other people's lives. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Michael and Jessica approached me for one final conversation before they left for their honeymoon, a camping trip in the mountains that they had paid for entirely with their own savings. "Mom," Michael said, "Jessica and I have been talking, and we want you to know that we plan to follow your example." "What do you mean?" "We mean that we want to live simply no matter how successful the company becomes," Jessica explained. "We want to raise our children to understand that money is a tool for helping others, not a measure of personal worth. And we want to make sure that Watson Business Solutions continues to be a company that cares more about helping people than making profits," Michael added. "Those are beautiful goals," I said. "But remember, it's not about living like you're poor when you're not. It's about living authentically according to your values, whatever your circumstances." "We understand," Jessica said. "We want to be generous with our resources while staying humble in our hearts." As I hugged them goodbye and watched them drive away in Michael's reliable but modest sedan, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The next generation was ready to carry on the values that mattered most, and they would do it in their own way, with their own style, but with the same commitment to kindness and authenticity that had guided my own journey. Later that evening, as I sat in my garden under the stars, Sarah joined me for one last conversation of the day. "Eleanor," she said, settling into the chair beside me, "I wanted to thank you again for everything, not just for today, but for showing me that it's possible to change, to grow, to become a better person. You did the hard work yourself, Sarah. I just believed in your ability to change." "There's something I want to tell you," Sarah said. "David proposed to me last week." "Sarah, that's wonderful news. Why didn't you say something earlier?" "I wanted Michael and Jessica to have their special day without any distractions," Sarah said. "But I couldn't wait any longer to share the news with you." "What did you tell him?" "I said yes, of course," Sarah said with a radiant smile. "But I also told him there were some things about my past that he needed to know first. So I told him everything. About my first marriage, about what I did at the wedding, about my connection to your family and your wealth." "How did he react?" "He listened to the whole story without judgment," Sarah said. "And when I finished, he said that he was proud of me for having the courage to change my life so completely. He said that the woman I've become is the woman he fell in love with, and my past mistakes don't change how he feels about me." "He sounds like a remarkable man." "He is. And Eleanor, we've decided that we want to have a very simple wedding. Just immediate family, no fancy reception, no expensive dress. We want to focus on the commitment we're making to each other, not on impressing anyone else." "That sounds perfect for both of you." "There's one more thing," Sarah said. "We want you to officiate the ceremony. David's not religious, and neither am I really, but we both believe in the values you've taught us. We can't think of anyone we'd rather have marry us." I was deeply touched by the request. "Sarah, I would be honored, but I'm not ordained or anything." "You can get ordained online," Sarah said with a laugh. "David already looked it up. It takes about 5 minutes and costs $20. Then I'd love to do it, I said, squeezing her hand. As Sarah prepared to leave, she paused at the gate to my garden. Eleanor, she said, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret keeping your wealth secret for so long? Do you ever wish you'd been honest from the beginning? I thought about her question carefully. I regret the pain it caused Michael when the truth came out, I said. I regret that he had to question everything he thought he knew about his life. But I don't regret the values it taught him, or the humility it gave him, or the empathy he developed by thinking he came from modest circumstances. So you think it was worth it? I think everything happened exactly as it needed to happen, I said. The secret, the revelation, the pain, the growth. It all led us to this moment, to the people we've all become. And I'm grateful for every step of the journey, even the difficult ones. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I understand. Sometimes the hardest experiences teach us the most important lessons. Exactly. And sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the greatest growth. As Sarah drove away and I prepared to go inside, I took one last look at my beautiful garden, my comfortable home, and the life I had built through honesty and hard work and determination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to help others and to use my resources wisely. But tonight, I would simply rest in the knowledge that I had finally learned how to be wealthy without losing my soul, successful without forgetting my values, and honest without causing unnecessary harm to the people I loved most. The journey from that scared young woman hiding her success in a tiny apartment to the confident businesswoman and proud mother I had become had taken 30 years. But every year, every mistake, every moment of growth had been worth it to reach this point of complete authenticity and genuine happiness. As I turned off the lights and headed up to bed, I whispered a thank you to Robert, wherever he was, for the love that had started this whole journey. And I whispered a thank you to the universe for the wisdom to finally understand that the greatest wealth of all is being surrounded by people who love you for exactly who you are. The secret billionaire who had hidden in shame for decades was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned that true success isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the relationships you build, the kindness you show, and the positive difference you make in the world around you. And that, I realized as I drifted off to sleep in my comfortable bed in my authentic home, was worth more than all the money in the world. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.